How is everybody? Excited? That was very low energy. Let's try again. How is everybody? Good? All right. Love it. Awesome. I actually should see if this plays noise. Ah, exciting. I have no idea if I'm going to use this. It's just when it's here, I find myself drawn towards it. So my hope is to just share some thoughts from my career. I'm going to skip a bunch of stuff in here because I prepared this for a longer span of time than I actually have. Especially because I would love, ideally, to have an actual conversation and answer questions if you have them. Just so that I know who I'm talking to, because I'm always curious. Who here is a composer or musician of some kind? Virtually none. Wow. Okay, yes, strong contingent over in the corner. Love it. So then, how many of you are on the business side of games in any sense? Art, game developers, programmers, anything like that? A few. So then some of you, I guess the majority of you, are here just because games are awesome. Yes? Okay. The one yay spoke for all of you. So everyone can hear me okay, right? Cool? Good. Well, I will give you a rundown. This is not very technical, but I always like to know how many sort of composers there are, just in case. But basically, the general rule of my career has always been this. The point of this is that every project that I take on, every creative opportunity, is a chance to push myself somewhere that I have never been. And so it's kind of like digging for fossils, where I'm looking for somewhere where I have never been, or some like skill or idea or concept that reveals like a gap in my knowledge. And this has been the rule for my whole career. And I think that if I had anything to kind of point to as why I've been able to have the opportunities I've had, it's probably because of this, and hopefully that will become clear. So I'm just going to quickly play through a few examples. Has anyone here played this game? This is over a decade old now, a first wave PlayStation 3 game. I saw one nod. Anyone else here familiar with Flow? Yeah, all right, a couple. So for those of you familiar with Journey, this is the first game that was made by that game company. They were, all of us were students in university, and then made this little game as like a Flash browser title as an experiment. It was actually the creator, Genova Chen's master's thesis, and we worked on it, put it online, and it went viral somehow, which to this day I'll never understand, especially because this was before YouTube and Facebook was nothing like it is now, and how it even went viral is beyond me. But the whole idea was, can we make a game where the point of it is relaxation and almost like a meditation, which even still to this day is kind of rare, but then was completely unheard of. And so the creator, Genova, said, I want music that's deeply interactive, but also very sort of electronic. And I have this little speaker here, so you can hear, this is what my music sounded like at the time. This is a piece of music I wrote just a year or two before doing Flow. So you don't have to know anything about music to recognize this is very kind of classical, very traditional instruments. It's also not very original. But that piece, I thought in terms of the orchestra, in terms of real musicians doing things like this. And so when he started talking about electronic music that was interactive, it was like my brain exploded against the back wall. I had no idea what that even meant. And so it required just throwing myself into the deep end of the swimming pool, as we say. And so here was what resulted. Oh, nope. Well, that too, but one step at a time. So here's a taste of what Flow looked like as it was re-released on PS3. And in the interest of time, I'm going to kind of jump ahead here. So every sound you hear was me. So the sound design and all the sound effects are the same thing as the music. They're all one concept, where everything you do is causing the music to change. And it's not just the obvious things, like you see how there's all these little sounds when the creature eats. It's also things like when the creature eats these little red pieces and swims downward, which of course the video cut right as that happened. Different creature, different level, but the same principles apply. The red causes you to go deeper and deeper and deeper, and there's 20 layers of depth, and so the music is evolving based on up and down, and then also the changes that are happening to your sort of physical structure. There, you can see kind of how that looked. So basically, this was terrifying. This whole project was terrifying because I'd never done electronic music and I'd never done anything interactive. And so it was just one constant experiment. And thank God I had like a year to do it because I really didn't know what I was doing. And I would try really simple, basic techniques like, you know, traditional sounding recordings. Like you couldn't really hear it in here, but as an example, there's kind of a background like hum, rustling almost in the background of all of this. In fact, you might be able to hear it at the very start. Like you have those higher notes, you know, but below that, it's like wind. All that is, I had no idea what I was doing. So all I did is take like a snare drum, you know, like a military, and just add lots and lots of echo, and it just becomes. It's like a really lame technique. But I had no clue what I was doing. And so, one by one, add up all these sounds together, and it ends up being that thing. And the game did really, really well, and it led us to be able to do this. There was one game in between these that I did not work on of that game company. It's called Flower, which if you also don't know Flower, go check out Flower. It's incredible. Then came Journey, and now the question was, can I write music that's closer to my familiar place of, you know, traditional instruments, the orchestra, all that kind of stuff, but be as interactive to the player as what you saw with Flow, where, you know, everything the player does is somehow impacting the music. And very quickly I realized I really have no idea what I'm doing. So I have a little video to showcase. Huge spoiler if you've not played the game, because this is kind of the ending of it, so sorry, but it's been out for like 6 years. You had your chance. It's been ported to PS4. There's been many opportunities. So this is, like I said, towards the end of the game, and all those little chirps that the player's putting out, these little sounds that I made, like, you know, these. There's a little collection of sounds like that that are blended of like a human voice and a cello, and so every time you touch little floating cloth or the player does this little singing which causes the shockwave like that, I had to make those sounds that had to be aware of what's going on in the score. You can hear all the orchestra. Now, what's going to happen as soon as the player comes down here, that little that was actually the game aware that we had just crossed a kind of magical border, and it was shifting, hopefully in a way that if I hadn't pointed it out, you wouldn't have noticed, and keeping the music moving forward. And so the game is full of thousands and thousands of triggers like these. And again, I had never tried anything like this because the goal was to blend the musical emotion of the orchestra but be able to wrap really tightly around the player experience. I don't know why it's going all Matrix on us, but I think it might be on my side here. But you get the idea. How many were here last year for GameOn? We did this piece of music you're hearing was actually in the concert last year. In case you remember that, it will not be this year, but we will have different Journey music. Plus some other fun things. So here's another one I want to point out. Players, that little was really supposed to happen as the player goes through that kind of waterfall. It's a perfect example of when I say I never really know what I'm doing. And part of why I don't know what I'm doing is that games make it really hard for you to know what you're doing. Because the goal is to make everything timed just right. Because in my brain, while I'm working on it, I have this fantasy that the player comes through that waterfall. It's a very magical moment, because you go through a waterfall and you end up underwater. So that's like obviously not consistent with physics, but that's the idea. It's magical, it's exciting. So you come through, and I want the music to kind of swell with that. Well, I have to set a trigger, and then there's a little bit of a lead-in. Well, what you just saw here was that the player kind of paused, but they'd already hit the trigger. So as a result, the music started before they were in the right spot. So there's like little flaws that hopefully as a player you would never be aware, but as someone who worked on it for 3 years, they drive me insane because I just can't ever get it exactly perfect. Here's another one of those. It's possible to trigger this huge climax and then to turn around and go back. This playthrough, they don't do that, but that would ruin it. And see, if you go super slow, you're still flying in glorious flight, and the music is already calming down ahead of you. There's little imperfections that when I say I don't know what I'm doing, we're always trying to get closer, closer, and closer to perfect, but we can never quite get there, it seems. And, you know, I feel very lucky because we got tremendous positive feedback from Journey. It was nominated for 1 million awards and won a bunch of things, and the sales were great, and the soundtrack has been performed by orchestras all over the world. But when I look at it, I see the things that I'm telling you right now. I see all these little things that are almost perfect, but not quite right. But if I hadn't pushed to the edge of what I'm capable of, it wouldn't have even been this, which is kind of the point I'm trying to make. And hopefully, I'm not just interested here today in just telling you about me. That's very kind of egocentric and narcissistic and feels weird to me. Hopefully, there's something I say that feels relevant and is useful to you and is interesting and that you can apply to whatever it is that you do, since all I know is that the majority of you are here since games are awesome. And I'm not speaking to a crowd of composers or game developers who obviously are going to be looking at this as kind of a practical, professional piece of advice. The hope is that this is something that you can just take away in general. Because what I have found is that if ever I say things like, okay, I think that's good enough, that for sure means it's not good enough. Because you should never let yourself off easy like that. There's probably more you can do. And then eventually reality sets in. You have things like deadlines or whatever that just force you to stop. But the point is, philosophically, always be pushing further into the unknown, because it's the only way to make progress. Here's another game I worked on. Probably none of you played this. This game was not a hit. It's sad because I really liked this game. It was a mobile game. I had never seen a mobile game that used Unreal Engine, which was pretty cool. You can look it up on YouTube if you want. I'm pretty sure the game is free on all mobile devices at this point. I'm going to skip past it in the interest of time because the next one is a more stark example of what I'm talking about. Here's a game that a lot of people don't realize I worked on. This is the remake from 2014, I think, of a game that was originally made in 1987. Who here is familiar with this franchise? It's kind of notorious. We have a few. Everyone who was a teenager in the 90s very shyly is like, oh, yes, I knew this one. Guys, at least, specifically. Leisure Suit Larry was controversial in 1987 because it was one of the first, if not the first game to be kind of candid about sex. And the original creator of the game, who also wrote the music, because that's the way it was always done in the 80s, is a guy named Al Lowe, and he had retired. They made 7 Leisure Suit Larry games, all using just beeps from the computer for their music. They had until the 7th game featured like a live saxophone, but that was about it. But Al was a jazz musician in addition to being a programmer and a kind of comedian writer, and so he wrote this game, and he created it, and when it came time to do this remake, he came out of retirement, and he called me and said, I'd love for you to do the score, and I said, can I use your original theme, which is this little, like a little jazz tune, right? And so I said, I'd love to use this theme, And he said, absolutely, you can, but you can do anything else that you want. And I said, well, you know, these games always needed a big band. Like, it was clear that that's what you wanted to do, but the technology couldn't support that in 1987, where literally the music wasn't even coming through a speaker. It was a thing called the Tandy system, where the front of the CPU of the PC has a little speaker inside that can make literally one sound at a time. And so we're not even talking about 8-bit here. So I said, I want to use that theme. Funny thing is, I've never written music for big band. This is a foreign concept for me. And he was like, just go for it, man. And so I said, he said, what's your idea? And I said, well, here's the thing. I remember this game. I remember this whole franchise. I was big into the Sierra adventure games in the 90s, which included King's Quest, Space Quest, Police Quest. All these were beloved franchises, and Leisure Suit Larry was one of those. They're all adventure games that started out as text-based, where you move the character around, and then you would type, like, look around, and then it would say, you see, you know, a door, or whatever, and pretty simple. You got really good at typing when you played those games. And so I said, here's the thing. I don't think this character is like a creepy sex addict, which is what a lot of people see him as. I said, I think he's just lonely, and he's an idiot. He tries to talk to women in ways that he thinks is charismatic, but he's really comes across creepy, but it's closer to like that Steve Carell movie, The 40-Year-Old Virgin, than it is like a weird predator like that movie 1 Hour Photo. And so he said, in 30 years, no one's ever described the game that way, and that's how I've always seen the game, so let's do it. So I said, let's make it so it's fun, it's silly, but there's heart.
Yeah,
so here's a little glimpse of what we made. And of course, I had to use his original theme.
You good? Mm-hmm. Here it comes.
It's like trying to be romantic and sweet. Idea. Once again, though, I had never attempted anything at all like this before, plus the game has all sorts of challenges associated with it. And on top of that, they were really behind schedule working on the game, and so I was writing music to, like, descriptions of what scenes would be, and I had no ability to see them or play test them or anything. And so, all things considered, I think it turned out pretty well, but it was terrifying and a challenge. But it was one of those that it exposed a new kind of vocabulary because I'd never really gotten my hands dirty with jazz before. And so this recurring theme of just living along the frontier of what you know, of your knowledge, it's not just exciting, it actually unlocks a better version of yourself. And it forces me to meet, like I'd never worked with any of those musicians, for example, before, and I met some lifelong friends in the process of that, and so it broadens your life also. Shifting gears dramatically, here's a very different kind of game from that one that I worked on a couple years after that, Assassin's Creed Syndicate. And there's so much I could talk about with this game. This was a really, really wonderful experience working with Ubisoft. They basically called me and said, you know, we want to shake up the Assassin's Creed formula, and we know you have a sort of a reputation for doing things that are weird. And so what weird can we bring to this franchise? And so we started toying around with it, and the big pitch that I made was, what if, first off, every time you get into a fight, I mean, who here has played any Assassin's Creed game? Probably most everyone, right? Okay, good. You're all good citizens. These are great games. And I'd been a fan of this franchise since it first came out, so I was overjoyed at the opportunity to work on it. But I did recognize that there were things that I didn't like, and I didn't know exactly the solution. But for example, every time you can pull out your hidden blade and take down somebody in the middle of the street like that, especially once you're a little ways into the game. Well, what would inevitably happen is it triggers like this super epic fight music as if you're in the final boss. And I said, that's super annoying, and it makes you just want to turn off the music. And anyone who's played, especially games like World of Warcraft or any MMOs, they suffer this problem enormously. And so I said, we can't do that. So we had to work together to develop a formula where if you out-level an enemy by some amount, eventually it just stops playing music entirely. So that if you're super high level and you go back to early parts of the game, you won't have any music at all because fights are over so fast that the music barely has time to say anything before the fight's over. And I said that will hopefully solve it. But then the question is, in the areas where we do have music, what are we going to do? And I realized that the characters, the twins, Jacob Fry in the middle and then to the right is the sister, Evie Fry, and you play as both characters. And I said, they're young, and their father was an assassin, and they're kind of arrogant and cocky, like anyone who fights them, even a boss, there's this kind of like, really? You think you can take me? So I said, let's bring that to the music. So let's let the music feel very unafraid. And so I started writing waltzes, little dances. So this is actual combat music in the game. You get into a fight and it starts doing this. Little single violin. I was really sure I was going to get fired because I just thought, this is so weird for Assassin's Creed, but I'm into it. And instead they go, can you write like an hour and a half more of those because it's a really long game and there's a lot of fighting. So then the question was, oh my God, I didn't expect to have to write that many waltzes. How in the hell do I stretch this thing out? So then what I pointed out was it's just solo violin. So then what we made it was after you complete the first few missions in the game, no matter what you're doing in the open world, it will build up the size of the orchestra a little bit as we go through more waltzes. So like here's how they sound about halfway through the game. And you can hear it's a bit bigger and busier. You can hear the difference, right? It's pretty clear. Like if you're getting into a fight here, it sounds farther along in the story. You feel like you're higher level. That was the idea. And then as you get even further, we add in some brass instruments, some solo trumpets. So the waltz quality has moved so fast that the clip of it basically has left behind the waltz concept. But it's still a dance. And then trumpets. Amazing musicians. That was all recorded in London, and they are freaks of nature. They're so good. They just so you guys are aware, actually, I will ask this as a question. How much time do you think the musicians spent practicing this music before we were able to go and record it? Like, I don't know if you can tell, but all of this, like it's some of it's a bit dicey. Just anyone by a hand here, just give me a guess how much time you think that they spend practicing that. Some brave soul. 40 minutes. Amazingly, that's too long. I thought usually, and I pose this question to folks that don't really know how the recording session world works, the answer is like a day, a week. I once was talking to some kids and they go, 5 years, as if I like wrote the music before they'd even greenlit Black Flag. So yeah, 40 minutes even is actually an overstatement. What you're hearing is usually the sight read, which means I put the music in front of them, and they've never seen it before in their life, and then they just start playing it, and we keep the mics on. And usually the first time through, what we call the first take, is 95% accurate. But then there's little mistakes here and there, and also little kind of expressions where, you know, if the melody is like, you know, I'll tell them, put a little bit more emphasis on the upswing so that instead of, it's more like little, so we're making artistic decisions, not technical ones, where they played the notes right, but there's a distinction. We do that, and then a second time through, and then it's basically fine, we can move on. It's insane. I mean, we could, on this game, we were in London for only a week, and we recorded 3.5 hours of music, which is insanity. But it's normal for them. They're just incredible musicians. And I always like to make sure people can hear how superhuman these people are in the games that they're working on. I am really quickly running out of time, so I'm going to move past that and go to one other game I had the joy of working on. This was Abzu. Anyone here play this game? Familiar with Abzu at least? Oh, good numbers of you. Good. Well, I adore this. This was a real dream of a project. Matt Nava, who had been the art director on Flower and on Journey, left that game company, started his own company called Giant Squid, and sort of gave himself a promotion to being the creative director. And this was the first game. And this one had all kinds of challenges that once again forced me to confront things I'd never done before. I didn't even know if I could do it. But one of them in particular was I wanted to create something that blended sort of the traditional orchestra, but also used all kinds of things I'd never tried before. And the most obvious one is,
So here we go.
I'm going to play this video, but I'm going to talk.
Here it comes.
One of my favorite instruments is the harp. Usually you have one. I said, what would happen if we have 7? Because I'm insane. But it really does raise a question, because I said, I've never even heard a recording of 7 harps together. How are they going to behave acoustically in the room? You know, the strings are so sensitive to the vibrations in the room that 7 of them might all create like a loop that causes the end of the world, all vibrating off each other, you know, a resonance cascade scenario like we say in Half-Life. Ended up being a really wonderful experience. The musicians did an amazing job, and then of course blurring it together with the orchestra. But you'll hear all kinds of other little sounds too, like that. Those are not the harps, they're little metallic bells and things. I just wanted to see if I could do something that existed kind of like Journey, but really was distinctly different from that. Part of the challenge is the game is so full of glorious animation. I wanted the music to feel like it had a lot of movement, but not that it was complicated. And then, of course, the other big challenge is it needed something otherworldly and something kind of magical over and beyond this, so I needed choir. Same thing. Everything was unknown. The choir, by the way, they're also just holding up the music and singing, and it comes out right. It's utterly mind-blowing. But this one was rife with challenges. You know, for example, on the specific subject of the choir, this title of this game and the kind of lore and backstory of it is inspired by this pillar called the Enuma Elish from ancient Babylonia, and the language is called Akkadian, and it's basically the oldest known creation story of the world. And so I wanted to take text from that in the original language and figure out how to put that in the choir. And again, it was one of those of just constantly going, I have no idea what I'm doing. I have no idea if this is going to work. I have no idea if it's going to be any good. I will be amazed if anybody likes this. And somehow, lucky enough, here I am. I only have about 10 minutes left. Here's another game that I worked on that I strongly encourage everyone to check out. It's amazing. It's our joke with this game is that we call it StarCraft meets Mario Kart, because it's meant to be as easy to pick up as Mario Kart, but it is a real-time strategy game in the vein of classics like Warcraft 3 and StarCraft. And it's really, really, really wonderful, and it just came out last year. Highly recommended for anyone who's a strategy fan, which I figure if I'm at an esports convention, there's going to be some strategy fans here. The score is really weird and unlike anything else that I have ever attempted, but I don't have time to get into it. The last point I want to make was that after doing these scores for almost over 10 years now, and always trying to find something within each one that I felt like I've never done before, I still reached a point a couple of years ago where I thought, I feel afraid that I'm starting to just kind of repeat myself and do the same thing over and over again. And so an opportunity presented itself to try something really and truly fundamentally new, which was live musical improvisation. Now, as you can probably tell from me playing the piano, I'm not a brilliant pianist. I'm okay. I can play a little better than that. But the idea is that I don't usually perform as a pianist. When I perform, it's usually conducting an orchestra like I did last year and like I will do again tomorrow night. And so the artist here is Angela Bermudez, which is sitting right here. And we, a couple of years ago, at an event kind of like this one in Washington, D.C., did a live improvisation. We'd never even met before. She's from Costa Rica. I'm from Los Angeles. We met and practically walked right out on stage where she was going to paint and I was going to play, and there was going to be no conversation ahead of time of what we do, except that what I play will be inspiring what she paints, and what she paints inspires what I play. So it's like this loop. And the way we describe it is we are telling you all in the audience a story, but we're not using words, and we've also never just sort of thought in advance or ahead of time what this story would be. Well, this experience completely changed my life. It was terrifying. It was like 1,500 people came, and we were both just shitting ourselves the entire experience. But we did a couple of performances. Here's the resulting painting that, again, this was made in about 30 minutes, entirely improvised. It's incredible to me that that's even possible. But sure enough, there's the proof. And the thing that I love about this was that it exposed an entirely new kind of art to me, because you look at this painting, and it's tempting to think, this is what it was always going to be. From the start, the goal was, I want to create this image. And that is not the case at all. That would be like listening to an entire song where the final note is like, after 5 minutes. And that last note is this. It's the final piece. It's the very last little sliver. But the whole point of a song is the 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, however many minutes it takes to get to the end. And that's the same here. The whole process of creating the painting was the art. The final thing is just the end. So it completely exposed a new way of thinking and a new way of creating art to me that was fully and totally unknown. And we've been expanding this and trying different formulas. We're going to do this tomorrow. I can't remember. It's in the program where it is. I think it's at 12:30, so either right before or after you have lunch. But come, we'll be doing this for you all to see. We did it last year as well, for those of you that might have seen it. And Angela will also be painting during the concert in a way that's going to be really exciting, and I'm just going to let that remain a surprise. Make sure you come to the concert. If you can come to the performance, we call it Diálogos, Spanish for dialogues. It's thrilling, it's fun. We'll also have another musician with us, so it's kind of a triangle and really exciting. So I only have a couple minutes, and I would love to answer any questions that you might have. So basically, the short version is that after doing this for 10 years, as you can see, I still manage to always try to find something that feels fundamentally unknown. And so as a result, yes, I still have no idea what I'm doing. You can always reach out and say hi online. Note that Instagram, someone stole my name, so I have a different name. I also didn't put a closing parentheses on this, so it extends forever into eternity. Any questions before I go? Yes? Thank you for dealing with my speed. I'm used to having like 2 hours.
Okay, so this might be a bit of a personal question because I have struggling myself over the past few years or so. I am writing music, but I'm not a composer. Just like
okay, so stop. You're writing music. You are a composer. Period. There is nothing different about us.
I have no idea what I'm doing.
Hello.
I have 0 lessons about what is music theory.
Not needed.
And I have difficulty to have the same theme in the song. And can you tell me any tips how to solve it?
When you say the same theme, you mean like creating variations without just repeating it over and over and over?
Yeah, basically.
I mean, here's a few things that hopefully will feel broadly applicable, but speaking specifically to your point. First off, go easy on yourself, man. You are a composer. Everybody has their steps that they take, and you don't have to know music theory. I happen to find that stuff interesting because I'm a nerd, but music theory just it's like saying you don't know how to cook because you haven't gone to culinary school. It's like if someone puts a skillet in your hand and some raw eggs and you just start doing stuff, you're cooking. Now, it might suck and make us sick, but it's still the first step, and we all have to do that. So let yourself relax and don't worry about how good you are or anything like that, because we all go through this. And my whole point of what I was just saying is I try to stay where you feel right now. I'm kind of trying to stay in that spot, because when I feel like I'm really clueless, I go somewhere weird and I do something that might be interesting. So don't worry about, oh, I have to know everything, because anyone who thinks they know everything probably is delusional, first off. But second, they're closing doors because there's no spirit of adventure and discovery in that. As to your very specific question, honestly, it's one of those, a very simple answer is like if you have a simple little tune, change one note, and then play it a second time and change 2 notes, and then change it a third time and play 3 notes. There's so many things that you can do to keep it alive. Like in Journey, the melody goes, right? If I change one note, I change 2 notes. You can tell it's the same thing, especially if I play them back to back, but then there's like an evolving quality to it, So like there's parts in Journey where you're on the mountain and it's scary and I'm going, like it's the same melody, it's just kind of stretch and expand. All I'm doing is literally just changing one note at a time. That's all. It's so simple. You don't have to overthink these things. Sometimes I'll use my software where you can like quantize the rhythms, you play them in and they're not, and it'll quantize wrong, and I'll just keep it. And I'll be like, that kind of sounds cool. It was supposed to go, bum, 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 and I played one note a little early, so it snaps it, so it's ba, 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 ba. And I'm like, I like that better, let's just keep that. It's just like whatever, there's no secret. It's just trying things and manipulating them until they sound good. There's no difference between what I do and what you would do. It's just, the key is always be making new stuff. That's the one thing people, they talk themselves out, they say, oh, I'm not good enough, so they go and watch TV or something. And I'm like, just keep creating. That's how you make these discoveries. I have piles and piles and piles and piles of shitty music that I would never let anyone hear, where I tried something and I thought, oh my God, I hate this. But I learned like maybe there was one little thing about it that worked that I can apply to something later, and maybe that piece I will share with other people. Does that help, or does that make sense? Sort of is close. I did my best. Yes. I'm happy to talk more, by the way. I just want to make sure I get to some other questions. Yeah.
You know, as they say among artists, especially that it's never finished, it's never perfect. You just stand up and leave.
Yeah,
So
well, yeah, it escapes.
Yeah, exactly. My question to you would be, when do you decide that it's enough chasing for perfection and when to stand up and just get it out?
It's actually usually not my decision. It's usually whoever hired me saying, we're out of time, and taking it away.
What if it's personal?
If it's personal, I will create a deadline to cause that to happen. So as an example, I just did a concert called A Light in the Void, which is like a big science and music show of real scientists coming out and giving speeches about their work like I'm doing here, but with an orchestra right next to them. And it was this whole thing I spent 4 years working on. And I realized I can work on this thing for eternity, so we put a date and started selling tickets, and I realized that's how I'm going to get this thing done. And I was literally working on it until 5 days before, even though I had 4 years to do it, because without that deadline, it just will go forever. So yes, for me, here's where social media is the best. You go on Twitter and on Facebook, and you say, I'm going to release a thing on November 1st. And now it's like the doomsday clock has begun. Now you have to get off your ass and do it because you've told the world it's coming. So that's usually my strategy, because you're right. Otherwise, we will just... And I will say, occasionally, it really is truly not ready. And I will say, forgive me, I'm delaying it a week or whatever. But no one cares. That's fine. But yes, I think putting a deadline on yourself, that's the only way. For me, at least, that's the only way.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm assuming someone is going to kick me off the stage when I have to give up the stage. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep going here.
All right, thank you very much for your presentation.
I hope it was interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting and really nice works as well. So this is going to be probably a more generic question for me, but...
Why is the sky blue?
Because I'm working in the music industry as well, as the previous guy mentioned, and my question would be how to get to the industry, you know, maybe sort of tips, like how to break through and, you know, and find the people in the industry and how to work with them. What is the best way? Like, how do you do it yourself, you know?
Well, so that's two different questions, and the second one is useless to you. How I did it is completely irrelevant, because how I did it was, first off, I got my start over 10 years ago based on very specific people and where they were in their career and where the industry overall was, and all of those variables you couldn't reproduce even if you tried. But you shouldn't even try, because the whole idea is your career will be a product of your story, your life, your adventures, all of that. And the idea is to kind of own those. So I once heard a really good analogy for this, where imagine that breaking into the business is like people moving along a wall, feeling for cracks that they can slip through and go inside. And so there's like this huge wall, and you see all these thousands of people sliding along, trying to find the crack. And when you find one, you slip through, and it closes behind you. So no two people will ever get in the same way. So bear that in mind. You can look at me, you can look at 100 other composers or musicians or whatever the career. This doesn't even apply to just games too, by the way. And no story will be exactly the same. In fact, sometimes they'll be wildly different. And so in my case, you know, I met a student who needed music. We were both students in university. I did music for his game, and then he recommended me to a classmate of his who was looking for music for his game, and that ended up being Flow. And Flow came out and caused a huge explosion, and it got me meetings and things like that, and off it went. Another example is the game Ori and the Blind Forest. A friend of mine wrote that music. His name's Gareth Coker. There was a website called ModDB where modders basically could interact with each other, and he saw a post on there about someone like working on a game, and he just said, hey, I'm a composer, and that ended up being Ori. And it was just like a random thing he found on a website. And so you just never know. Sometimes you're standing next to someone in an elevator, and you just say, hey, what do you do? And they're like, oh, I'm a game designer. Oh, no kidding, I'm a composer. What kind of games you like, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes it's like that, where a sudden moment happens, and then other times it's just getting to know people gradually, and it might take years. I mean, the key here is you can't be in a hurry. Having a career is a marathon. It's not a sprint. So you need to embrace the idea that looking for work, looking for opportunities is a permanent part of the career forever. I mean, for me, I write demos and auditions and things like that for games all the time, and for movies and all that sort of thing as well. Now, I'm also lucky that I've worked on enough games that people are familiar with my work that I'll sometimes just get a phone call and they'll say, do you want to score this game? And I'll say either yes or no. But there's still plenty of times where I'll see a project and I'll think, ooh, that could be cool. You know, I'd love to go on for that. Perfect example is the new Assassin's Creed Odyssey that came out. I tried to get that job. I did not get it. Funny enough, the guys that did get it, they also tried to get Syndicate. So now we're 1-1 with each other. I didn't even know that they were trying to get that job until I messaged them afterward and said, you know, hey, good on you for Odyssey. And they were like, well, good on you for Syndicate. But that sort of thing happens. And so I think the point is I can summarize it more effectively. Go out into the world, which might include, maybe that's just going online. But coming to events like this, first off, major good first step. Because there's a whole bunch, they have a whole indie town here, for example. There's a whole area of independent game developers. All of those people are relatively early in their career, some of them not so much. Some people have had long careers in indie doing amazing work. But they're all people that generally, the part of why they like working in the indie space is that it's smaller teams and more human connection, which means if you walk straight up to them and you say, hi, my name is, whatever your name is, introduce yourself, start talking to them, that's probably why they're here. They like that. Now, the truth is the people at the big publishers and the big studios, they like that too because it's we're social creatures, but it's also a business driven by human interactions. So going to events and actually just getting to know people means you meet some people here, you meet some people there. Maybe you'll meet someone today that ends up helping create an opportunity that gets your career going by next week. But maybe you met someone here today that 5 years from now will lead to something. Another good example of that, friend of mine, Jack Wall, he scored the latest Call of Duty Black Ops that just came out, and he did the previous 2 before that. He's worked on Mass Effect. He's worked on a million huge games. The Call of Duty thing came from a connection of someone he had met 20 years earlier, and they'd never worked together. And then the guy said, hey, I'm now working with Activision and blah, 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 and I would love to work with you on this game. I think about you every now and again, even though we met, 20 years ago and have never worked together. It was like that's a long time for that to pay off. But it was a real connection, and they were really genuinely friends. So that's always what I recommend. Just go out, be yourself. I know it sounds like a generic question being met with a generic answer. Just like, go and love the world. But the truth is, that's all that I've done. All I've done is just go out and be me so that people see what that means, and they come to me, or they know to avoid me. Like, there have been plenty of times where someone called and were looking for music, and my name came up, and they were like, oh, no, because they thought he's not right, because I try to make it really clear who I am and what I do. And that's good. That's fine with me. If they can come to a no just as fast as a yes, that makes me feel like I'm doing something right. So don't be afraid to just kind of be yourself, whatever that may mean, and just be patient. It's the only thing. So hopefully in there is something useful. And
it is useful. Thank you very much.
Well, best of luck. And when I say, go online, be in touch. Like, I'm easily found on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. My email's on my website. There's a lot of other folks like that too. All you do is just reach out. A friend of mine, the previous Call of Duty World War II that just came out last year, the sort of return to World War II of the franchise, that was done by a friend of mine named Will Roget, who just played one of the previous Call of Duties and just emailed the team and said, hey, I'm a fan. Great job. And then they heard some of his music, and they were just like, would you be interested in talking about the next Call of Duty? I mean, you just never know. Meet people. Don't be afraid. Yes?
Hey, thanks for your enthusiasm. I wonder,
it's my pleasure.
I wonder, when are you usually asked to join projects, and when you would like to join projects? Because
That's a great question.
Do you feel that you need to take a look or be a part of development in order to make better music for games, or you just join after it's like almost finished? Because even today, I've been meeting many people which were saying, okay, we're gonna outsource the music guy at the end and pay him a little bit, because they don't want to pay him the full wage and include him in their development team. So what's your take on this?
Unless they outright told you, I don't want to pay the full wage, that's why I am going to wait or whatever, don't be so quick to assume you know their motivation. A lot of times, the reason why people will wait is because they're so distracted building the core systems of the game that adding another layer of responsibility is something they just feel like they cannot do and do a good job with the other thing. That's why on bigger games, they'll hire someone, like an audio director whose sole job is to deal with the composers, deal with sound design, deal with the voiceover actors, all that kind of stuff, so that the development director, the creative director, the game director is focused, on the game mechanics and things like that, and then they're kind of letting someone else deal. Am I out of time? Okay, good. I'll wrap it up, and then we'll migrate to the hallway. So the short answer then is I love to be on as early as possible because I love to be part of the development and let the music grow with the game. Sometimes I'm not so lucky, but generally, they always prefer that. Even if they are busy, I just say to them, give me some tools to be self-sufficient, and I'll just work on my own and check in with you whenever you have time. And so it might be only once every 2 months to start that they see how I'm doing. But if I can play test prototypes or be looking at concept art, I can be working on my own. So the key, I love being on early, but it's kind of up to them. And I could get a whole other conversation about the money thing that you sort of tapped on, because there's a lot of ways that gets structured. But I don't find that people tend to be cheap. People want the best thing for their game, and they want to treat well the people they're working with. I've never felt anyone trying to screw me on a project, literally ever. I really don't think they are. I think sometimes people make mistakes, and sometimes there's miscommunications, but that's usually all that it is. And so I go into it assuming the best, and it usually is correct. So that, just a little side note, since you mentioned there's no conspiracy theories to screw over composers that I've ever come across. So anyway, I know I'm out of time. I'm running late, so I'm going to get out of your way. Thank you so much for coming. We'll hopefully see you tomorrow.